right, good afternoon. Welcome to day 3 of our 3-day masterclass about becoming a confident and authentic leader. I'm John Little. I am the founder and CEO of the Winner's Edge Coaching. So today we are going to be talking about leading authentically and scaling organizational confidence. Now, really, what I've been talking about the last 3 days has been both from an individual lens and an organizational lens. Because here's the reality. The more confident and authentic your leaders are within the organization, the stronger the organizational culture will be, the better they'll be able to connect with the leaders. The leaders will have more buy-in, the leaders will have more influence, the leaders will get more authority, the leaders will get better opportunities and ultimately get greater results. And that's the goal, right? The goal is for our leaders to be those strategic, visionary, transformational individuals within the organization that help us get those results that we're looking for. So with that, we're going to go ahead and dive right in and kind of talk about what we're trying to accomplish, right? Because here's what the reality is that a lot of times organizations are struggling because the leaders are not actually leading. Leaders are either managing, they're kind of stuck in the day-to-day tasks. Leaders can sometimes be doing things that are either counterproductive or they're not really serving in the role that they have been elevated to, right? And as HR leaders, this is something that you often see. You may see these struggles pretty consistently with the teams that you work with. And one thing that I know working with organizations across the country and working with a lot of HR leaders is that ultimately all roads lead to HR, whether that be from a performance issue standpoint, whether that be because there's a lot of turnover and your CEO is wondering, why is this costing us so much in turnover? Why are our talent acquisition costs so high? Why do we have such low attrition? Could be your employee engagement team saying, hey, we've got some pretty scary looking survey results. Things aren't really looking very good for us. Or it could just kind of be the day-to-day chatter that we hear from the people who are on our teams, either asking for changes to be made or processing people who are being put on performance review plans and things like that, performance improvement plans. All of those things tend to have some roots, not saying it's always on leaders, but it tends to have some roots in leadership. And that's exactly what the slide is saying there, is that most organizations are bleeding potential. And again, that potential is potential growth, potential results, potential outcomes, potential to business development opportunities. All of those things are happening as a negative result or a downstream effect of leaders performing and not leading. And so what does that mean in terms of actual cost? What does it actually mean for organizations when leaders are struggling with their confidence? I talked on yesterday's session about the fear and the fear-based behaviors that you'll see with leaders a lot of times in those situations. And what we recognize is that the teams will mimic or will display those same fear-based behaviors that they see with their other peers, with their other colleagues, with their leaders, right? When they see those things, then they tend to struggle. They tend to feel as though that they can't win. They tend to feel as though that they can't succeed. They tend to feel as though they can't put themselves out there because they don't see their leaders doing it. One of the best leaders that I ever worked with, she always had a phrase, the speed of the leader. And the speed of the leader means the speed of the leader sets the pace for the organization and for their teams. So if leaders are operating from a space of fear, then our teams are also going to mimic that fear and mimic those same behaviors and some of those same patterns that really will lead the teams to struggle. So there's a stat there on the screen that 83% of employees have witnessed their leaders projecting false confidence, right? So that's kind of scary when the teams can see that it's a little bit of false bravado, the fake it till you make it, which I don't really love, but they see that leaders will sometimes lean into that space of false leadership. And so they're less likely to speak up. They're less likely to trust in that leader and believe that leader has the conviction that they need in order to effectively lead them. Then we also see things like innovation stalling and people not being willing to take calculated risks, people not being willing to raise their hand for new opportunities, people not being willing to speak up and step into spaces that may actually demonstrate the potential that they have. So when leaders are operating in low confidence, if I'm on that team, then I'm going to have some of those same concerns that if my leader isn't confident, then are they going to advocate for me? Are they going to be someone who's going to support me? Are they going to be someone who tries to elevate me? Or if they're operating out of fear, Are they going to quash anything that I bring to them because they're afraid of how it may make them look? Are they going to be someone who may not necessarily even want to hear the ideas that I have because they're struggling just to survive and get by in the roles that they have? And then from an HR standpoint, how does that translate, right? When we have low confident leaders, when leaders are struggling with confidence, then HR kind of becomes the dumping ground. And you see it on the screen there, it becomes emotional cleanup, right? So then our HR teams and our HR business partners and our HR managers and those that are working with the various groups within the organization, they're just constantly either putting out fires or trying to prevent fires from happening. And so instead of HR being able to be focused on being strategic and looking at the organization and how can we maximize our most valuable asset, which is our people, they end up having to do all of this emotional cleanup work, which is exhausting for our HR professionals. So our HR professionals end up getting frustrated and burned out. When our HR professionals get frustrated and burned out, then we start to see the trickle down effects through the organization. And when those things happen, those impacts are really hard to reverse. HR teams, you see there on the screen, HR teams spending up to 40% of their time addressing issues that come from poor leadership. And again, these are things that can be addressed early. These are things that can be taken care of. These are things that can be addressed proactively. But what I want my HR leaders to think about is not so much the outcomes, but think about where are those roots of low confidence leaders and what things can we do to support those leaders, to support them being more confident, more comfortable, and for them to actually be able to lead the way that we need them to lead. So there's a couple of different things that we'll see sometimes. Sometimes we'll see performative leadership and authentic leadership. And performative leadership, when we see that, those are leaders that aren't really stepping into those leadership roles and owning those spaces. And they tend to prioritize appearance over substance. So they don't really tend to say things that they really need to say. They don't necessarily come up with any new ideas. They don't tend to innovate. They tend to parrot, or they tend to just repeat things. They tend to try to play it safe. Or they tend to become an echo chamber for others, right? When they have that fear of vulnerability being perceived as a weakness instead of a strength, then we will see at times that our leaders, that our organizational leaders that are performing aren't really leading, but they're more so trying to protect themselves, and they're not willing to be vulnerable. They're not willing to let that guard down and allow their teams to see that they're vulnerable, allow their peers to see they're vulnerable. And really that vulnerability is just a way for you to be curious and a way for you to learn more. The more vulnerable you can be as a leader, that's going to dramatically increase the level of trust and buy-in that you have from your team, from your peers, and even from the C-suite. They tend to make decisions based off of perception or what they think people want them to do rather than leading, right? Leading is not doing what everyone thinks that you should do all the time. Oftentimes, leading is having the courage to do something different, do something innovative, do something that's going to shake up the norm. Those are things that we're looking for from our leaders. We're not looking for our leaders to just continue to do the status quo over and over and over again. That's not a way for organizations to grow. You can sustain for a while, just continuing to do that, but that's not what we're looking for our leaders to do. Our managers are there to help us sustain. Our leaders are there to help us grow and expand. And it does create that exhausting, always on culture. When you're always performing, you always feel like you're performing. You're always feeling like you have to perform, either for yourself or for your teams, whatever that may be. When you have that always on culture, it can be exhausting because you never have time to kind of power down because you don't have that vulnerability. You don't have that comfort of saying, I need to take a breath. I need to take a beat. Now let's look at authentic leadership. So when you are in that space of authentic leadership, what's that look like? Well, it looks like that you're embracing the strengths that you have within yourself as a leader and also within your teams while recognizing the limitations that you have as well. Why is that so important that you have that counterpoint between your strengths and your limitations? Because as a leader, when you have your strengths, and those are things that probably helped you get to where you are, you want to lean into those strengths when you can. You want to be able to leverage those strengths and also recognize your limitations. And that's where you want to build up people on your team. That's where you want to, as you're assembling your team or as you're reconfiguring your team, recognize where do we have strengths and where do we have limitations, where do we have opportunities, and those are the people that you're looking to add, right? We always hear the term culture fit. Culture fit tends to really end up being a bunch of clones. Culture fit tends to be more of the same of what we have. Instead, leaders should be looking for culture adds. They should be looking for people to put on their teams that they don't currently have, different skill sets, different mindsets, different experiences, different perspectives. Those are things that are culture adds. And that's what leaders need to be looking at where do we have opportunities to add to our team so we have a more well-rounded team, a stronger team, a team that can cover each other's back, a team where we have some strengths, we have some opportunities, but we also have those mirrored by having those who have opportunities getting paired with someone who has a strength in that area. So that way it becomes a full circle. Using vulnerability is a way for you as leaders to be able to recognize where those things exist, even yourself, recognizing the things you do well, recognizing the things that you don't do well, right? For example, I always tell people that Excel is my kryptonite. I'm not great at Excel. If you give me a spreadsheet, good luck on getting something quality back. But knowing that allows me to leverage the tools that I have, or the resources that I have within my team, within people that I work with. So that way I can focus on the things that I do really, really well, right? I'm really good when I'm in front of an organization, when I'm in front of a team, when I'm working one-on-one or when in a group setting with leaders, doing coaching or doing training or doing development. That's where I'm really good. Doing the admin things, that's really not the best use of my time. Being creative, doing marketing, those aren't things that are great use of my time. So as a leader of my organization, I have to recognize where my strengths are, and I want to spend 85 to 90% of my time focusing on those strengths, while knowing that that other 10% is just kind of supporting those who are doing the things that I don't do well. That's a way that I can use vulnerability strategically. Making decisions aligned with your values, right? So there's another session that I talk about values and the importance of value, that the importance that values play in developing your leadership brand. So part of that is recognizing what are your personal values and how do you bring that to the organization. So my personal values are that I'm kind, that I'm consistent, that I'm outcome oriented. Those are things that I bring to my organization. Those are things that I bring to any individual or any team that I work with. That's my approach. So my brand aligns with the decisions that I make. So when I make decisions, then I want to make sure that those decisions align with my brand. And that allows me to be fully present in all the settings that I'm in, because I know where I'm good. I know where I have opportunities. I know that the vulnerabilities that I have, I'm not going to necessarily always put those on display, because that's where I have support. That's where I lean into support on my team. And those are things that are tied to my values. So that allows me to show up being kind, being loyal, being consistent, and being outcome oriented. Those are things that help me as a business leader, as a business owner, and as a leader in general, show up as my best self and show up authentically as much as possible. So how do we do this? How does this kind of work? So when you look at this confidence cascade model, and I've also used this as a bit of a model to kind of demonstrate how you can work, and it actually does start with trust. So starting with trust, once you start to build trust, once you're able to identify how trust is built, how you're able to recognize how you lean into trust, how you build and continue to grow trust, then that helps you gain influence. So once you are able to gain influence from others, and once the influence that you gain continues to grow, once the influence that you gain continues to provide opportunities for you to be granted authority, right? So you gain influence, you're granted authority. When you're granted authority, then people start to invite you into the room. People start to seek you out for feedback. People start to look at you as the person that they want to talk to. And then that opens up opportunities for you. And those opportunities that are presented to you, those are the things that will really help you as a leader grow, help you as a leader get more opportunities for your organization. So for my HR leaders, and this is something that we really kind of recognize on a consistent basis, that, again, all things kind of flow to HR. So here is where we end up running into challenges, right? What we tend to try to do, and a lot of times these things are kind of pushed upon us, is we get in a space of this carousel. We get in a space of, it's either a training issue or a hiring issue. And if we try to fill those buckets, transactionally, then it's a lot harder to get results, right? What we want to be focusing on is how do we develop the leaders that we have within the organization and not just train those leaders, right? So, you see the quote there, you can't coach your way past a culture of fear. And that's real, or you can't just lean into coaching because that's sometimes a short-term fix for individual leaders, right? Leadership development programs can be an option. They can be a route that you follow, but a lot of times we'll see that they don't really work if we're not addressing some of the core behavioral issues that exist, right? We can train on skills all day long, but if we're training on skills, that doesn't always mean that we're addressing the root causes and the root issues that need to be addressed in order for us to see a difference. The other thing that HR sometimes will end up doing, and again, oftentimes this is because this is pushed upon them, is they may end up just hiring a whole bunch of people, right? If people leave, we just hire new people. And the more turnover that we have, all the times that we have turnover, that just one by one erodes a culture and erodes the opportunities for us to build and sustain something great, right? One of my favorite stories that I share around leadership was one of the teams that I did leadership development with. And we spent a lot of time on trust. We spent a lot of time on change because they had a large scale change, large scale software change that was coming about. So one thing that they needed to do as a team, as an organization, was they needed to have a really, really strong, cohesive group during this process. So as a result of the leadership development work that we did, the amount of time that we focused on trust, the amount of time that we focused on change, that team made it through that difficult transition, that difficult change experience intact. And the reason they were able to stay intact was because they were equipped with the tools to understand what they were about to encounter and how to navigate through some of those tough times. So they didn't have that hiring carousel where people were leaving and then they were adding people who had to be trained. And those people who had to be trained had to figure things out on the fly. If you can keep a cohesive team together, then that means that you have the opportunity to make things grow. You have an opportunity to do things in a more seamless way. And when you're running into those two areas where you just feel like you're consistently doing skills training over and over again, or you're just hiring and letting people go, or people are leaving and you're replacing them, when you're on that hiring carousel, that just burns out our HR folks, right? And it gets to the point where they can be disengaged. It becomes transactional for them. They lose focus on the organizational health and the organizational well-being and the ways that they can contribute to the organization in a positive way. And they can just kind of get into a place of they're just kind of going through the motions. And that's no shade on my HR folks out there. That's just a reality of what sometimes happens. And so why and how that happens is that training trap and the hiring carousel that we get stuck on, and we're not actually solving the issues. We just continue to put Band-Aids over it one by one. So here are some ways that you can really get an idea of, are your leaders hiding, or are they in the shadows, or are they actually stepping up and leading? So the first thing that we can do is getting some insight into their decision-making process. Like, do they understand the why behind the what? And in understanding the why behind the what, are they able to articulate it kind of upside and down? Are they able to articulate it to their leaders as to why they're doing things? Are they able to articulate it to their peers and partners as to why they're doing things? And are they able to articulate to their teams why they're making some of the decisions? The big conversation around accountability, right? If there is a mistake, if there's an issue, if there's something that falls by the wayside, do leaders step up and take that responsibility? Do they have accountability to themselves or for themselves? And are they holding other people accountable in a responsible way? So I do a whole other session on accountability. I did that in last month's masterclass. So accountability is one of the things that I really focus on, because it's a challenging thing a lot of times that leaders will experience. But the reality is accountability isn't that hard once you understand the formula. How are they in getting and sharing feedback, right? Are they able to give good feedback? Are they able to receive feedback? And then once they have that feedback, are they able to synthesize it into action, right? Because that's the thing about feedback. Feedback can be great, but if you don't synthesize that and then turn it into action, then all it is just another conversation. How emotionally intelligent are your leaders? How much are they investing in their own EQ? How much are they investing in their own personal development? How intentional are they about being emotionally intelligent? And then consistency, right? How consistent are your leaders, and can they measure that? Can they document that? Can they really track that? So this is an opportunity for you, looking at these 5 categories, rating your team, rating your organization on a scale of 1 to 5 in each one of those categories, and seeing where your score lines up and seeing where there are opportunities for your team to grow. So I'll just share an example of a case study that I worked with an organization earlier this year, a tech firm. And what they did was they had some issues in trust. They had, through the assessments that we did, through earlier conversations that I had, there were some issues that they had with trust. So we had to spend a lot of time on building trust and identifying what some of those key trust markers were that needed to be worked on. So we've spent some time on psychological safety, what that means, right? It was a buzzword. It's been a buzzword for years, but what's it actually mean? And how can you as a leader encourage and support that your culture is a culture grounded in psychological safety? And then we spent some time on vulnerability, right? And how can we create that culture again, where leaders first are vulnerable, and then they're able to demonstrate and display what that vulnerability looks like to their teams, and how can they use that vulnerability to build trust. So the work that we did, we saw some pretty quick results. So you see some of the results here. So, we were able to decrease their turnover by double digits within a short period of time. We were able to see some results in the trust that was built within the teams, right? And that trust was a really big factor in some of the things that they were struggling with. They were able to be more innovative. Once they had that culture of trust that existed, it was amazing how quickly people were bringing new ideas to the table. Now, did all those ideas end up coming to fruition? Absolutely not. But that's what we want. We want the ideas to come to the table, because the more ideas we have, then we can select the best ones, rather than having just a few ideas. And sometimes we just have to go with the few ideas because that's all that we have. The more ideas we have, the better the process can be to determine what's going to be the best thing for us to try moving forward. And then we also saw increases in retention, and we saw increases in promotion, because they were intentional about focusing on developing their leaders. And as we saw the leaders develop within the organization, superstars just started to shine right away. Once they had the opportunity to shine, then they were really able to make that next step and make that next growth. So how do we scale this organization wide, right? How do we do these things within our organizations? And a lot of time it starts from the top down. HR tends to have a great influence on this, but one of the first things we can do is we can normalize vulnerability as a strength. Make that one of the things that the organization is kind of built around, right? Again, leading from the top, leading from our leaders, demonstrating those behaviors, being vulnerable, sharing the things that they're working on, sharing the things that they've struggled with in the past, just really leaning into vulnerability as a strength, leaning into, again, emotional intelligence, demonstrating and displaying EQ, using models within the organization so you can create common languages. So you can use a model like DISC or use a model like Myers-Briggs. So that way you have some common language within the organization. So you're able to have some things around EQ that will help you understand one another, help you work better with one another, and really help you develop those foundational elements within the company. And then aligning the development within the organization to trust building. So almost all of the work that I do, and I want to say almost all, I'd say a solid 95% of the work that I do with individual leaders as well as organizations and my group coaching, trust is the first place that we start. Why do we start with trust? Without trust, it's so much harder to do anything else. Without trust, it's much harder to communicate. Without trust, it's much harder to lead situationally. Without trust, it's much harder to have communication around change leadership. Without trust, it's a lot harder to have some of the hard conversations around accountability. So by starting with trust and building development around trust, those are going to be the conversations that will help you go farther faster. And that's what we want as leaders. We want to be able to stand out. And as organizations, that's one of the things that we're going to be able to lean into as one of the hallmarks of what we are built upon. So if you had an opportunity to see how things would be differently if you were able to lead authentically, and if your leaders were leading authentically, here are some things that I've seen and that I know will make a difference within your teams. So the team dynamics, it's the dynamics between the individuals on the team as well as between the team and the leader, you would see those change pretty dramatically because they'd be having different conversations. Conversations wouldn't be about blame. Conversations wouldn't be about trying to hide things. Conversations wouldn't be about trying to figure out how can we hold each other accountable. Conversations wouldn't be about individual accomplishments. You'd be seeing more team accomplishments. You'd be seeing more things around how can the team be great? How can the team grow together? You'll start to see, again, more innovation. I've talked about innovation a number of times because that's so important for organizations to continue to grow, right? We are in such rapidly changing times. Like 2 years ago is so dramatically different than it is today compared to probably the previous 15 years to 2023. So we're seeing that we need to continue to innovate. We need to continue to find ways to do things differently, to do things faster, to do things in a more maybe a technology favorable way. Whatever the case is, whatever it is that we need to be innovating, those things happen when leaders are leading authentically and creating that culture of vulnerability, culture of trust, and having those, a grounded, a leadership culture that's grounded in EQ. What we will continue to see from that is we will see that will attract the talent that we're looking for, right? So we talked about adding to the team. We talked about developing and growing your team. But when it's time to expand, when it's time to add people externally to your team, when you have that organizational culture, when you start to have the reputation in the marketplace of this is the place that I want to work, then you're going to see the top talent tripping over themselves to come to work for you. And that's what you want as an organization. You want to be a destination organization for people to come work for you or come work with you. And that starts not only with the results, but it really starts with the culture and the leadership culture that you establish. So here are some things that I help organizations do in order to be able to build their confidence and grow confident, authentic leaders. One of the things that I do is a leadership audit. So whether that be talking with leaders within the organization or doing an audit of your leadership development program that you may have, or if you don't have a leadership development program, what are you doing to help grow and support your leaders? And then from there, that helps to get some clarity on what the next step is, right? And that next step, is that something that looks like a group coaching? Is that something that looks like leadership cohorts? Is that something that looks like fractional leadership development strategy work? So there's a number of different options. And then the coaching support, right? Can it be one-on-one coaching? Is it group coaching? How are you going to continually pour into your leaders? Because training is an event, and that's why training doesn't work. If you send someone just to training and you don't have any type of long-term support, whether that be peer-to-peer, whether that be peer-to-leader, whether that be external coaching, whether that be cohort structure, whatever it is that is going to continue the learning, give people an opportunity to come back and share successes and struggles, that's what helps the organizational culture grow. That's what helps you build a strong leadership development program, a long-term leadership development strategy. That's the thing that makes the difference between doing leadership development the right way and doing leadership development training. So what's the next step for you? So what you've seen along the bottom of the screen since this session has begun is the Leadership Confidence Index. So that's the next step. That's the next step that I want you to do is take a couple of minutes, go to hrlci.scoreapp.com. And from there, you'll be able to take a short assessment, and that assessment will take you about 5 minutes to complete. But through that assessment, we'll be able to get a good idea of where you are in your leadership career, as well as how you see the organization and opportunities within the organization to continue to grow leadership, not only from your standpoint, but also from your opportunities to grow leadership in the organization. And really kind of here's the end goal, and we're kind of running up against time. So I want to make sure we can get you out of here in the 30 minutes that we promised. Here's the challenge. Be the mirror and not the mask, right? We want you to take the mask off. We want you to step into yourself, to step into and own your presence, own the leader that you're designed to be. There's tremendous opportunities for you from a leadership standpoint to grow into being more confident and to be more authentic. We're just desperate for leaders at organizations right now. I hear that time and time again, that the challenge that we are facing is we just don't have enough leaders that are confident, enough leaders that are stepping up. We don't have enough leaders that are leading. So I'm going to challenge you to step out of the shadows, step from behind the mask, and look in the mirror and recognize how you can start to truly lead your organization. Hey, it's been a wonderful 3 days. Thank you so much for those of you who tuned in to this masterclass. Looking forward to continuing to do these. But in the meantime, go ahead and connect with me on LinkedIn. If we're not already connected, send me a DM. Let me know what you thought of this session. Let me know how this was, how this connected for you, and would really love the opportunity to learn more about what's happening with you, with your team, with your organization. So until next time, have a great rest of your day. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you on the other side.